Alrighty, folks, we're going to go and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Your Future Now series. We're excited to have Shannon here with us today. So, thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and keep letting folks in as they join. Today's presentation is all about OOD, Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, if I said that correctly. I usually get it backwards. Oh, yeah, okay. Preparing for employment while in school. So we're very excited to have Shannon Fletcher with us. She is the vocational rehabilitation supervisor for our region. So she's here to talk about all the different opportunities and programs that they have available for students that we support. So without further ado, Shannon, the floor will be yours to present.
Okay, now can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Sorry, there was a couple pop-up screens there. I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. So I'm Shannon Fletcher. I work with OOD, which is Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. And what we do is we help students and adults gear towards work um, when they're ready. So we serve individuals age 14 and up. Um, Most of the students that we serve in the school age population have an IEP, an ETR, or a 504. But they don't necessarily have to. So if they would have like a physical disability, or if they have a disability that they do not want an IEP or a 504 for, they don't need a lot of accommodations, they could still be referred to OOD for services. Like I said, 14 and up is what we're looking at. We typically work with the schools. We are in all of the schools in Knox County. We actually are in every school in the state of Ohio. There's a liaison for every school district in Ohio. So if you're not in Knox County, there's other school districts that have liaisons for OOD as well. Um, Eligibility for OOD is very simple. So we're looking at a documented disability. So a lot of times, if we've got that IEP and the ETR, that ETR has a category on it for which they're eligible for special education services. That documentation can be taken for a disability. So we're not sending your loved one out for further medical information unless it's absolutely necessary. Um, the second requirement for eligibility is there's an impediment to employment. So again, the 504, the IEP, they're going to tell me what the accommodations are that the student requires. So we a lot of times are finding that when they have an accommodation at school, that typically does equate to accommodation over in work. So, we take those and we look at those and we figure out if that would affect work when they're getting older. They need to want to work. So in the state of Ohio, Ohio has taken the stance through the WIOA legislation that every student in the state of Ohio on an IEP 504 has to have a transition plan. So at this point in time, all students in the state of Ohio would meet that requirement. And the last requirement is that they could benefit from services to get or keep a job. So with OOD, most students, I think in the last, 9 years that I've been a counselor, I've only had 2 students not been found eligible for our services. So the vast majority of of students are going to be eligible for OOD. Um, the application, there is a packet of paperwork that is sent home with the students, or can be sent, mailed, emailed, however you would need it, to get that information to us. It can be given to the schools as well. We can do intakes at the school. We can do intakes at after hours, at local businesses, whatever you need. But the applications typically take about an hour. And what we're looking at is we're just trying to gather information about your son or daughter so that way we can provide the best services for them. A lot of times I'll get, so and so wants to be a YouTuber, or so and so wants to be a marine biologist. Let's talk about those. Let's figure out, is this more of a hobby, or is this something that will equate into a good paying job for them? So we're kind of just in that first meeting, just getting information and seeing what they're about, and seeing, where their accommodation needs to be made. Um, After the intake meeting, the counselor then goes and does eligibility. So basically, even though most students in the state of Ohio on an IEP 504 are going to be eligible for services, we still have to document that as well. So we're looking at 7 functional capacity areas. Those areas are communication. That includes like their verbal communication, but it also includes their written expression, how they get their point across. We look at mobility, and not necessarily do they have a driver's license, but can they navigate through their environment, or do they need supports to do so? Um, we're looking at interpersonal skills, how they get along with others, how they handle redirection when it's needed. So lots of different things in interpersonal skills. And then we're looking at self-direction, which is how they motivate themselves to get things done. So, do they get their homework done on time? Are they using their accommodations to get their homework done on time? Are they frequently missing assignments or absent from school because they just don't want to get out of bed? Those type of things. We also look at work skills, which is how they best learn. So we understand that when we're meeting with a student that's 14 versus a student that's 18, they don't have the same experiences for work. So that's a little bit harder of a category to fill out. But what we do is we look at how they best learn. So, do they need information broken down into smaller steps? How do they retain the information best? Would it be better to have a checklist or something visual for them to see versus something written? Those are all work skills areas that we would address. And then the last one is work tolerance. Or no, I'm sorry, I missed self-care. Self-care is one as well. So self-care is how they care for their own needs. Self-care, we do include medication administration, just to, if they can manage their own medication. We're looking at how they, do they need reminders to take a shower? Do they need reminders to dress appropriate to weather? So basically, basic needs. Can they prepare simple meals? Can they manage their own doctor's appointments? Those type of things are also things that we're looking at. And again, taking into account their age as well. And then the last area, like I said before, was work tolerance. Work tolerance is anything related to their disability that would hinder them working. So, for example, if somebody has an allergy to bees and they required an EpiPen, that would be something that would be a work tolerance area. If they couldn't do steps because they had a mobility issue, we might throw that in work tolerance as well. So we would need to look at that. Um, so typically speaking, that's something the counselor is dealing with. We're not asking the parents, to do the eligibility for us. We do that. We would get in hold of you and let you know whether or not your student's eligible for services. And then the next meeting that we would do would be talking about what those services look like for the students. So that's typically the meat of our conversation tonight, is to talk about what those students might get for services through OOD. We have traditional services and we have what we call pre-employment transition services. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the traditional services first, and then we'll go into pre-eds because it's a little bit different. So traditional services, right now we're offering 2 different summer youth work experience programs. We've always offered the one that is 5 weeks, 20 hours a week, and they get paid minimum wage to practice working. This past summer, we also recognized that some students weren't ready for those long days, or, maybe they needed a reduced, they could only do 3 weeks instead of 5 or something like that. So we did do a level 1 program, which is anything under 15 hours a week and under, 5 weeks. So they could be, 5 weeks, but it would be, 10 to 15 hours a week, something like that. So it's a modified shorter version. And that looks at different ways for different providers. So, we would come to you with that information when we're ready for that. The Summer Youth Work Experience Program is operated through OOD. OOD pays for the wages of the student participating, and we do so at local businesses. So we work with agencies that have relationships with the local businesses in Knox County and the surrounding counties, and they offer the work. So, they're able to say, okay, we can take up to 4 students because that's our maximum, and we can ensure the students will have 20 hours a week of work, or whatever that looks like for that business. We then advertise that that student can participate at that site. There's usually a list of, I would say, half a dozen to a dozen sites within Knox County that we offer each year in various businesses. So it's not, we're trying to make sure we're hitting several different industries and not just the same one repeatedly. So we typically have had businesses like Rural King, Bob Evans, um, Comfort Inn, the Nazarene College. Um, there's been a lot of different providers that have, or I'm sorry, businesses that have stepped up into the community that allow our students to go work there. So we also provide a job coach there the entire time. So whether it's a level 1 or a level 2, job coaching is built into the program 100% of the time. So your student will not be left by themselves for any length of time. Um, the requirements of the job coach isn't necessarily to be right beside the student, but to make sure that the student's understanding safety of the employer and making sure they understand the work skills and the work that they're being asked to do. So they're kind of the liaison in between the student and the employer to ensure that the employer's needs are getting met while the student is also learning the tasks as well. So both of those programs, level 1 and level 2, have the component of a job coach built into the program 100% of the time. The other thing that those programs can offer is transportation if it's needed. So we do recognize that a lot of our students are not necessarily going to have a driver's license at age 15 and a half or 16. So recognizing that fact, we've been lucky in Knox County. Most of our vendors will say, hey, we can provide transportation in-house. And what that means for you guys as families is that your student will be picked up by their job coach, taken to work, worked with their job coach, and then brought home by the job coach. So you wouldn't be having to use CAT or any other public transportation means. Usually our vendors are willing to provide that transportation need within our county. So that's really nice that they do that. So OOD would pay for transportation, whether it would be through the vendor or it would be through CAT. But like I said, typically speaking in Knox County, we've been lucky that our vendors will say, hey, we can do that in-house. So we don't have to utilize CAT, but we could provide that either way. Um, with the summer youth work experience, I think I hit on they get paid minimum wage to practice working. So they're not necessarily employees of where they're doing their work experience at. OOD is paying those wages for that student to practice working. The host site or the employer is providing the work so that they could have a realistic work experience. At the end of those programs, we always go over how the student did, what they liked, what they didn't like, what went well, what didn't go so well. And then we come up with a plan for what's next. So we do that as a team. Um, we'll get together with the family, county board, if county board's involved. We also will get involved with the school and let them know how the student did as well. So if there's things that the school could focus on, um, we, are working with them closely to ensure that they're getting that service as well. Some students will come to us and they don't need a summer youth work experience. They either have had a job before and it went well, but maybe they got laid off, or maybe they quit because they had sports or something. Something's gone where they're not working any longer, but they need assistance with finding another job. That service, we call it non-permanent job development. And what it simply means is it can be after school, it can be summer. We didn't want to specify, it used to be called summer work experience or summer job development. Now we want to make sure that it's all encompassing. So we call it non-permanent, and it just simply means that that's not the job that OOD is going to close a case on. So this is a job where they're building their resume, they're getting their skills. With non-permanent job development, the difference is with summer youth work experience and non-permanent job development. Um, Non-permanent job development, we're helping the student apply, know where to look for openings, apply for those openings, prepare for an interview, and if they need us to, having somebody go to that interview with them to ensure that they understand the questions being asked. We won't answer the questions for them, but we can rephrase the questions to help them during that interview. So the difference is that the summer youth work experience, OOD is in control, if you will, in regards to the hours, the wages, the transportation. When we get to non-permanent job development, the employer is in control. So the employer is going to be the one to set the wages. The employer is going to be one to set the hours. And then transportation falls over to the family to figure out. So that's something we talk about before we do that service. Um, We can also provide on-the-job supports. So non-permanent job development is simply that, helping them get a job. Not or on-the-job supports is helping them learn the job, helping them learn the employer expectations, making sure that they get through orientation, because sometimes that's difficult. Filling out the paperwork for a new hire, that's difficult, especially if you've never done it before. So having somebody there to help them with that, that's on the job supports. Um, for work, for on the job supports, we do provide the service more when they start a job, because that's when it's needed. As the student becomes more independent with the job, then on the job supports will fade out, with the goal being that the student will work independently at that location for that employer. Sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't, but we get back together as a team and we figure out what that looks like and what we can do to move forward with that student. Maybe it looked great on paper, but when we got in there, it wasn't so great. And sometimes that happens. Um, if we get a student and they're ready to graduate, we do what we call performance-based job development. So there's two ways of doing that. One is supportive employment performance-based job development, and one is just regular performance-based job development. And basically, the difference is just the level of support that the student gets. If it is found that the student needs, more than a weekly meeting, or they're going to need follow-along support after they get a job and OD closes a case in the future, then they would do supportive employment. And that's something, again, the counselor will talk to you guys about and make sure that you're in agreement with it. If they don't require that level of support, or you don't feel that your son or daughter need that extra level of meetings or the support at the end of a job, then we would just do performance-based job development. I will say the county board in Knox County is really great at making sure the services and supports are there for the student even after OOD's case is closed. So that is something to consider as well. But supportive employment job development, or just performance based job development, is simply a package of three services kind of lumped in together. So the first part of it is job seeking skills training. So again, helping them prepare for a job search, making sure that they understand what's needed for an application, making sure that they have a resume that meets employer standards, practicing for interviews. Registering for your Ohio Means Jobs and learning how to use some of the online search engines to find work, those kind of things. Once that's completed, and they develop a job development plan, which again is something that you guys do as a team. You talk about where they're wanting to work, what's reasonable for hours, what's reasonable for wages. Is it feasible for them to get there? What would transportation look like? Any other barriers to employment? So that's all in that job development plan that you guys are doing at that first part of the meetings. And then once that is done, the second part, or the second tier of the service, is helping them with the job search. So applying, knowing where to look for those positions, preparing for an interview prior to going to an interview, following up with the applications that they submitted, those type of things. And then once they get a job, we just don't say, see you later, you're employed, congratulations. We want to make sure that we're following up. So at least 90 days. If a person needs a job coach, that 90-day clock doesn't start ticking until they're 100% independent on the job. So we wouldn't necessarily, a student could be employed 6 months before we're talking about closing a case successfully. It just kind of depends on where that student's at. With on the job supports, I don't think I said this, but there's not a set heavy timeline that we go by. It's where the student is at the time. So if they need, some students will just need it for orientation and they're done. Other students will need it 2-3 weeks. Others will need it for a month or two. So it just kind of depends on the student and the job that they've got. So on the job supports can there's not a time limited area on that. Those are typically our traditional services. Now, we do have things that are secondary services, or services that they could do if they defer their diploma. So secondary services could be assisting them with getting their driver's license. If they're going to college, looking at what we could maybe provide for a computer, or, could we assist with any of the tuition or fees or books or supplies? Do they need interview clothing? Do they need steel toe boots or something for work when they get a job? So those are what we call secondary services. So they have to be participating in a primary service, such as a job search or working, so that way they can access those secondary services through OOD. The reason we call them secondary services is they have to be able to eliminate a barrier to their employment. So not everybody's going to be eligible for interview clothing. Not everybody's going to be eligible to get assistance with their driver's license. It's on a case by case basis based on need and based on, w- that a barrier and how we can, get around that barrier and help solve that barrier so it's not a barrier in the future. Um, in regards to like if a student decides to defer their high school diploma, we would be looking at some of our services that we work in partnership with other agencies. One that's available in Knox County that you guys might have already heard about because they've already done one of these um, webinar things, is Transition U. Transition U is a good program. It's over in Knox County Learning Center. It's in conjunction with the Knox County ESC, which is Educational Service Center. Um, and basically with Transition U, it's a full day of vocational skills training, and a full day of independent learning, independent living skills. So there is no academic component to that program, um, which means that the student would have to already have met the requirements for their high school diploma, but have decided to defer the diploma. If that is something that you're interested in doing or talking about, I recommend that you get with your schools and make sure that you're talking about that at your IEP or 504 meetings to kind of make sure that they've got it on the radar. Um, Another program that we have that the OOD is a little bit more involved in is Project Search. Now, in Knox County, unfortunately, there is not a Project Search that feeds into any of your school districts. However, there is a Project Search in Delaware County over at Grady Memorial. There's a Project Search in Marion County over at Marion General Hospital. And there's a Project Search in Mansfield over at Mansfield General. So those programs again are similar to Transition U in that they are vocational based, they're independent living skills based, and they're not an academic component based program. So the difference between Transition U and Project Search, other than location, is that Project Search is geared towards that's your final year of school. So if you decide you want to do Project Search, it is your final year. So the plan is written such that Project Search is it. When we get to like March-ish, April-ish, we start flipping over and start really looking at job development services for that student. So we're looking at, is the host site, is that a good fit? Is it not a good fit? What's realistic again? Let's talk about, their strengths that they've gone through the program. So Transition U also, they get to go out to more businesses in Knox County, whereas the Project Search programs are housed within a hospital setting. So of those three hospitals. The hospitals they kind of operate like a mini city though. So there's food service, there's housekeeping, there's janitorial, there's room cleaning or room service, there's patient escorts. There's lots of different things that they can do in that hospital setting. So when they're in Project Search, they have the opportunity to do 3 different internship programs throughout that entire school year. When they're at Transition U, they rotate through those programs, those businesses with Transition U. And then Transition U is designed where they could attend until their 22nd birthday. It's again an IEP team decision, but it is something that most of the students in Transition U will stay longer than just the 1 year, unless it's they're just starting their 21st birthday, because they're only able to stay in school until their 22nd birthday. So that's Project Search, that's Transition U. Um, those are our typical services that we are involved in with OOD. We do have classroom-based services, and I kind of left these to last because they're different and they're unique. So pre-employment transition services, there's a set of 5 different classroom-based services that we can do. A lot of the schools do like these because they can be put in the IEP as a transition goal. Out of the 5 services, we have instruction and self-advocacy. That one's teaching you a little bit more about advocating for yourself. It's teaching you more about how to ask for assistance when you need it, when to ask for assistance. It's also going over rights and responsibilities so they have a better understanding of when somebody may be taking advantage of them. Um, we have job exploration counseling. That one I use a lot for students that come to me with an unrealistic job goal or something or they don't know what they want to do or something I'm kind of on the fence like, hey, is this really something that would be a good feasible job goal for them? So, job exploration counseling is having them do some assessments, learning more about themselves, their strengths, their interests, their pins, if you will, the preferences, interests, needs, and strengths, and kind of equating those to jobs. So it's getting that first look of, okay, I'm really good at this, and these are jobs that I could be really good at that maybe I didn't think about, or maybe, I didn't even know existed. So, those we do that with the job exploration counseling. Work-based learning is another pre-employment transition service. That one is basic employer expectations, just kind of learning what it means to work. So they might do some job shadowing or career exploration where they go out and just see, watch the workers work. When you go out to a restaurant, you're not really watching the workers work, you're there to eat. This kind of changes that focus to watching what the workers do because in a restaurant setting, there could be several different jobs that they could see in different job tasks and titles that they could look at as far as work. So it's changing the focus, learning more about employer basic expectations. Some of the other things we go over in that program is attendance, when's appropriate to call off, when isn't, what they can and can't talk about, what's appropriate, not appropriate to wear. So it's, again, just that basic entry level employer information. Um, Workplace readiness training is another program that we have. That one is teaching them the pieces and parts of what it takes to get a job. So a lot of times with students, I say, you really just can't walk into a business and say, hey, dude, I want a job and get hired on the spot. That's really not how that works. Um, some have told me it does work that way, but most of the time, not so much. But there's a process. So, there's an application that you have to fill out. There's an interview you might have to go through. They might want a resume, so there's different things, there's different pieces and parts to getting a job. The other thing we like to do with that program is if there happens to be a job fair or a career fair, we have those students go to those so they can see what those look like because those are different in and of itself. So, and you got businesses there, you bring your resume, you look nice, and you could potentially get hired on the spot at those type of locations. So that's what we do with the or I'm sorry, the workplace readiness training. And the other service that we have is counseling on post-secondary opportunities. So post-secondary is anything after high school. So it could be college, it could be apprenticeship programs, it could be adult education, it could be certificate programs. It's any further training that's required after high school. So it doesn't necessarily have to be college. If they do want college, that's something we can talk about as well, but that program is designed to kind of figure out what are the pieces and parts of what's needed for what's next. So if it's college, we're going to talk about, okay, there's a FAFSA, you need to enroll. What's your major going to be? Is your major in line with what you want to do for a job at the end? Those type of things is what we're going to go over so that the student has a better understanding of what's next. If it's apprenticeship programs, we're going to look at the Ohio Apprenticeship Program list and kind of figure out, okay, so is this one a good opportunity? Is this one not? What do you need? Are there things that, we could help you with? Is it paid? Is it not paid? How long does it last? Just again, going over those basic things so they have a better understanding of what's next. Same with the adult ed programs, and same with the certificate programs. So we're looking into what's next for them. I don't know if any of you have heard, we do have a thing now called College to Careers. OOD is advertising that pretty well, a lot right now. And College to Careers is our focus where we are actually focusing on students attending college or attending adult ed or those certificate programs, getting more credentialed after they're out of high school. So College to Careers, we are providing up to $14,000 a year in extra support for college. It doesn't mean everybody's eligible. There are some things that the counselor has to do to make sure that it's a viable job goal for the student, to make sure there's labor market information, meaning that there's jobs in the state of Ohio doing what they're doing, making sure that, school's a good option for them. The last thing we want to do is set them up for failure. We want to make sure that it's going to be successful for them and they're going to feel successful too. Um, but college to careers, we are, like I said, are offering up to $14,000 this school year for extra tuition support. We call it an OOD educational support fund that we have available. And we also provide tuition assistance through the regular means. So we've always done the tuition assistance through regular means. Ohio this OOD educational support fund is different. This is new this year. So that is an option that we have available to us as well. We also are embedding counselors, which meaning that they have an office space and a presence at the colleges. Right now, we're focused on the state colleges. So, North Central State, COTC, Columbus State, Ohio State, OSU or OU, all of those colleges we're looking to have embedded employees in so that they would have access to the student services, student disability services, and make sure that they're available to the students that are attending that school. So that is another service that we've got available for OOD as well. All right, so I have talked for like 33 minutes. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. I'm happy to answer any questions you got.
Thank you so much, Shannon. So any questions, feel free to unmute yourself to ask Shannon, or you can type them in the chat.
Hi, Shannon, it's Bobby. I'm just going to ask you about the college to careers.
Yep.
For that one, do you also fill out the FAFSA and do all of that stuff too?
No, students, so we won't fill out the FAFSA with them. Most of the high schools have somebody to fill out the FAFSA. And then colleges typically have a college night where the FAFSA can be filled out with their supports as well. We're not really trained to do that. And a lot of it is that, the parents need to provide information that most of the time the students don't have necessarily.
No, what I meant was, are you basing their score on the FAFSA? You know how you get the
Oh.
FAFSA? Is that for
Yes.
the college? Is it still
yes,
okay.
Yeah, so the FAFSA is part of our formula that we're using to figure out what we can contribute. So the FAFSA, there's the front page when you get it back is called a SAR, which is a student aid report. We look at the estimated family contribution, and then we figure out what we can and can't provide after that. We also, I don't think I said, we're looking at least cost schools in Ohio. So most of our state schools, actually all of our state schools are going to be least cost schools. So if you're going to a state school, it's going to be pretty straightforward. But if you're going to a private school, we have to look at the least cost school that's available for that program that you're attending.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. My name is Jennifer. How does my daughter is switching into doing homeschooling for 11th grade. We
Okay.
are working with the Summit County Board of Disabilities, and they recommended OOD, and I found this to learn more about it. I understand some of your services might be a little bit different than maybe our OOD, but as far as is there a big difference with somebody that's homeschooled and getting started with OOD, especially I believe my Summit County person is going to be checking all the boxes and the forms and all that kind of stuff that maybe the school would handle.
Yeah, no, at this point in time, there's no real difference. We do have students that are homeschooled on our caseloads. The big difference is if the student doesn't have an IEP, for example, or a 504, they don't have that documentation through the school, then we need to get medical records for the student. So we would just ask that you sign a consent for wherever your student, your son or daughter goes to school, goes to the doctor. And then we would ask for that information from the doctor. So we would just be looking for a diagnosis. If there's any, what's the word I'm looking for? Not accommodations, but if there's anything that the student restrictions, I'm sorry, if there's any restrictions that we know the doctor says, absolutely not, they can't do this, then we need to know that information as well. And as far as
Oh,
services
thank you.
go,
That was perfect. And we have an IEP, so that's great.
okay, good.
Thank you.
So the other thing is services shouldn't look much different in Summit than they do in Knox. So OOD should be statewide. We should be providing the same support. So all of those programs that I talked about should be available in your county as well.
Wonderful.
Businesses might be a different, but the other services should be available.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
What other questions do we have for Shannon this evening?
I'm happy to answer any questions. No question is a dumb question.
Mary or Simon, any questions?
I don't have any questions at this time. It's all very helpful. I need to think on it.
Okay.
I don't really have any questions. I'm just impressed with all the opportunities there are.
So I didn't talk about how to make a referral to OOD. It's pretty simple. We do have a website. It's called ood.ohio.gov. You can get a hold of your local county board of DD as well, or you can go through your school district. So there's OOD Works is our website that you can actually fill out an application online for your son or daughter to participate to get the ball rolling. So, or you can have everything filled out through the school or the DD board. Sometimes you could just call our local offices. So our Mansfield office is the local one that serves Knox County, but there's a local office in Summit County as well. So you can call a local office and just say, hey, I want to refer my son or daughter. They'll take down your information and set you up with an appointment for a counselor.
Fantastic. We'll leave it open here just for a minute longer for any last minute questions. I know everybody thinks of all the questions right after we get off. That's what happens to me.
That's all right.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much for presenting and sharing all your information. Again, this has been recorded, so this will be put on the Knox DD website under the Your Future Now tab. So if there's somebody you know that missed tonight, or that you had somebody that you thought of that you thought, oh, they could really use this information, our tech person, Brittany, usually gets it up within a couple days. So definitely be looking for that to share that information out. Next week, we have representatives from the Career Center, the Technical Center, and COTC will be joining us to talk about post-secondary options and supports available for students with disabilities. So we're excited to have them. So Shannon, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And if there are no other questions, then I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you.